Hi, everyone, and welcome to our first webinar related to orthodontic aligners. We're very excited today to go over with you the basic orthodontic planning steps and just some quick notes. If any of you have a question or if you would like to give us any comments, please use the Q&A section, or you can also give us any of your comments or questions in the chat box. And my name is Fakhr Sanhouri. I'm the head of the Ortho business unit at 3D Diagnostics, and this will be our first webinar related to ortho aligners. And we're looking forward to more webinars related to ortho treatment. And please make sure to follow our pages to get the latest updates and all our next webinars in the near future. We have today Dr. Ahmad Mostafa. He is our clinical director, and he will be the one taking care of our presentation today. Dr. Ahmad, please go ahead.
Thank you, Fakhr. Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Ahmad Mostafa. I'm the clinical director of the Ortho business unit in 3D Diagnostics, which I joined in 2017. Ever since I was young, I've always enjoyed good music and team sports. I've been playing the guitar for over 10 years now, and I played basketball for about 9 years. You see, music and sports have always had an incredible impact on people. They bring them lots of joy and consequently make them smile. As a dentist, smiles are the first thing I always notice, so you can say that they inspire me to bring you a perfect smile. You see this picture on the left side of the screen. This is actually me playing my intro in my wedding here in Egypt. So, as I say, you can see me smiling. Moving on to the table of contents for today's webinar, we have the learning objectives. We also have the requirements. What are the requirements needed for an aligner's case? We have the learning ortho concepts, impression pitfalls and how they can be fixed, clinical tips and tricks to avoid the most common impression errors, intraoral scan pitfalls and how to avoid them, benefits of using an intraoral scan, and last but not least, the aligner's digital planning workflow. What are the learning objectives of today's webinar? We have to learn the ortho planning concepts, understanding the STL fire errors and how they can be fixed, clinical tips and tricks to avoid the most common impression errors, and intraoral scan success strategies. To begin with, what are the requirements for any aligner's case? We need the pictures. They are called orthodontic pictures. We need 8 pictures, 3 extraorals, and 5 intraorals. We need the doctor's notes or the chief complaint to know exactly what we're going to do with the case. And of course, the STLs, what we're going to work with. Learning ortho planning concepts. What are the importance of the photos? Number one, we need to ensure that the materials we have, they actually belong to the patient, so that no time is wasting on creating a setup that does not belong to the same patient, and not to waste the doctor's time reviewing an incorrect setup. So it saves the setup time. Number two, it helps in the articulation of the models. We need to look at the pictures while we are manipulating the STLs and the models on our planning software and look from each side to make sure that we are settling the models in the correct articulation. And last but not least, to verify the bite of the patient, just to make sure that the articulation that we did manually using our software is actually the patient's bite. What are the importance of the clinical notes? We need the doctor's notes to process the case with specific requirements. For example, we need to know the maximum number of aligners needed for this case. If you want to treat a specific arch, either the maxilla or the mandible, or even both, If you'd like to have any IPR in this case, IPR stands for interproximal reductions, or if you want to have engagers or attachment in this case, any kind of instructions would help us during our processing. If the doctor doesn't provide us a productive note or any note, this will cause our in-house orthodontist to come up with a treatment plan that contains a large number of aligners, because he needs to fix all the problems he can see while planning the case, which may not fit the doctor's requirements. And hence, the case will be a lot of aligners. Talking about the productive note versus the non-productive note. Productive note, for example, it can be, please fix the crowding of the lower teeth, or rotate the upper front teeth, or maybe a specific tooth, for example, number 7, number 9 needs a little bit more adjustments or rotations. We need to change the occlusion of the anterior segment to prevent further damage to the incisors. Any kind of specific notes would help. However, a non-productive note can be like, please align the patient's teeth, or here's an aligner's case, please do your best. This is a non-productive note and will lead to a large number of aligners, as stated before. So here's a question. What are the items needed to process an aligner's case? You have about 20 seconds to answer this question, and I'll provide with the correct answer. Okay, we have 100% saying all of the above. Exactly, this is absolutely correct. We need STLs, of course, that we're going to work with, intraoral and extraoral pictures, and the chief complaint of the patient or the doctor's note. So it's correct that all of the above. Moving forward, we have the impression pitfalls and how they can be fixed. Number 1, we have poor tray selection. The tray selected must capture the necessary information without distortion. It should be large enough to cover all the teeth without contacting the soft tissue. However, once the impression is taken, the tray should not show through. As you can see in the picture, the green color indicates the tray which is shown through in the incisal edges or the incisal portion, which is not correct, and that will cause an incomplete detail of the incisor edges. Number 2, we have inadequate impression material. When the impression material is mixed correctly, the color should be uniform and without streaks. This is more common to get streaking with hand-mixed putty materials. You see in the picture, we have 2 colors, the gray color over there and the blue color with some streaks in between. This is inadequate impression material and will cause some of the detail will not be captured enough. And then we have the poor margin detail. What does poor margin detail mean? It means that we didn't capture the full anatomies or the gingival margins and mucosa around the teeth or in specific areas. For example, in this picture that we have over here, the last molar, we didn't capture the most distal part of it or the gingival part. As you can see, we cannot see it in this impression. So this is a poor margin detail. And then we have internal bubbles. As you can see, we have a large bubble in the anterior segment, and we have some bubbles over there in the lingual portion of the premolar segment. And that actually leads to an incomplete impression. So we cannot move these teeth while we have this much of a bubble, because we didn't have the detail needed to move these teeth. That can be caused due to either saliva contamination or trapping of air while taking the impression. Number 5, we have margin detail. Margin tears can be caused due to saliva contamination or cement contamination in a specific part of margin of a tooth. So that will cause a tear in the impression. Number 6, we have rushing of the impression or failing to keep the patient still. That will lead to what we call a double impression. As you can see in this impression, you can see the teeth are doubled in most of the areas. And when we poured this impression and scanned them, you see in the palatal areas of the posterior segment, you see double impressions or double imprints of the palatal cusps of the premolars over there and the molars. So the aligners will not fit accurately on the teeth, and hence the movements will not be accurate enough to reach the goal of the treatment. Number 7, we have choosing the wrong impression material. We need to choose the correct impression material while taking an impression or sending the requirements for any aligner's case. Why? Because we need to capture all the details needed from the teeth and the gingival mucosa and the J areas, all the details that we can get in order to have an accurate aligner that can actually move the teeth and lead to the goal of the treatment. Then we have the clinical tips and tricks to avoid the most common impression error. Number 1, we need to make sure that the tray is not too small and fits your patient well. If the teeth are touching the edges of the tray, then the tray is too small. Number 2, we need to use plenty of PVS materials. PVS is the polyvinyl siloxane. It's better to have too much than too little. Number 3, if the case is an ongoing aligner's case, it's advisable to remove all the engagers or attachments prior to taking the impressions. We need the impressions free of engagers or attachments to make accurate molds. Number 4, you need to fill the undesirable undercuts with wax. For example, the interdental embrasures, if they're too deep, then we need to put some wax on these embrasures and take the impression. This will allow you to remove the impression cleanly without creating tears or distortions. Number 5, refrain from moving the materials as it sets. We actually recommend waiting for an additional 60 to 90 seconds longer than what's instructed before removing the trays from the patient's mouth. And last, don't forget the live body material. Always add the live body. It's very beneficial to add a wash on your impressions to capture more detail. So here's a question. What is the preferred impression materials for an aligner's workflow? Please feel free to answer. You have about 10 seconds and I'll answer with the correct one. Okay, we have 100% saying polyvinyl siloxane or the PVS impression. Actually, this is the correct answer. Why? Because we can take multiple washes using the PVS, which results in better accuracy and detail capturing. PVS impressions may be stored for up to 14 days prior to pouring without compromising the accuracy of the material. However, for example, for the alginate impressions, we need to rush the pouring to be done in less than 1 hour. Okay, moving forward to the intraoral scan pitfalls and how to avoid them. Number 1, we have holes in the scan. As you can see in this picture on the right side, we have incomplete incisal edges of the anteriors and the canines. This is due to the moving the intraoral scanner too quickly before capturing the detail of the teeth. So to avoid this, we need to make sure to stay on the tooth long enough so that the full tooth can be captured and all the details are captured of the tooth. We need to check the scan before moving forward to make sure no anatomy is missing. Number two, we have incomplete scanning process. We need to make sure to rotate the intraoral scanner to capture the gingiva and the surrounding structures to capture the full gingival regions and the gum lines. Check the scan to make sure we have 3 to 5 millimeters of gingiva and mucosa is captured before moving on to the next quadrant. Because as you can see, we didn't capture the gingiva or the mucosa around this premolar, and in these molars, we can't see the anatomy of the teeth or the gingiva, so we cannot move them. Number 3 is the excess material. Actually, this is not an error of an intraoral scanner, because excess materials can be caused due to the fact that we have holes in the scan, which was the number 1. Some intraoral scanners, they can fix the holes by themselves by adding some materials over the holes, and that will lead to an excess material. However, if we have scans with holes in them in the teeth, and when we import them on our planning softwares, the software automatically fills these voids or holes with materials, so that will lead to excess material. As you can see in this area, there seems like a bar over there, and that will impede the movements. So in order to avoid this, we need to make sure to stay on the tooth long enough so that the full tooth or teeth can be captured. All the anatomy can be captured. We need to scan. We need to check the scan to make sure no anatomy is missing before moving on to the next quadrant. So what are the benefits of using an intraoral scan? We have, number 1, it's more comfortable for the patients than the conventional impressions. Number 2, of course, it saves costs on impression materials. It's more efficient communication with your lab, higher accuracy than traditional impressions, fewer errors result in having to re-impress, improved quality impressions to ensure better fitted restorative solutions or aligner solutions, reduction in the potential for errors, and go green. The digital impressions contribute towards the efficient file system and support paper-free office environments. Then we can scan the whole mouth in under 10 minutes, with maybe needing just 1 or 2 minutes to complete the scan and to check. And it's eco-friendly solution that eliminates the need for plastic trays and the material used for the impressions. And of course, less chair time for the patients. Here's a question. How many millimeters should we leave from the gingival margins while removing the excess materials from an STL? We have 1 millimeter, 4 millimeters, and 6 millimeters. Please feel free to answer this question. I'll give you 10 seconds to answer. Okay, we have 11% saying 1 millimeter, we have 78% saying 4 millimeters, and 11% saying 6 millimeters. Actually, the correct answer is 4 millimeters. Why? Because while removing the excess materials and borders from the STL or the edges, we need to keep around 2 to 4 millimeters of gingiva and mucosa around each tooth to avoid what we call gapping or snapping of the gums during the tooth movements. So 4 millimeters is the correct answer. Moving on, we have the aligners digital planning workflow. In our aligners digital workflow, we use two main softwares. We use what we call the CAD software that we need to do our STL preparations. We need to prepare the STL before importing them to the planning software, and I'm going to explain what preparation means and preparing the STL before importing them, and our planning software. So to begin with, the STL preparation, we need to prepare the STL, remove all the extra materials, the excess edges, the smoothing the teeth or the gingiva before importing the STLs. Why? We need to make sure that the teeth. So in this example that we have in front of us, if you're using an intraoral scanner, the intraoral scans can be rough on the edges. As you can see in the lower area, it's not smooth, it's not a straight line. We have some extra material over there, extra edges, the black area and the molar segments and the anterior segments. As you can see, also, we have some sort of a groove on the premolar over there. So we need to prepare these STL before importing on the software. So we need to smoothen all the edges, the maxilla and the mandible, make them straight enough. If we need to elongate the STL from the gingival margins, we can do so. If we cannot see the gingival margin accurately, we can actually accentuate the gingival margins. And of course, we can remove the groove. You see this groove over there in the initial scan? It's not there. We smoothen this part. However, if you're using a BDS impression, now we need to pour the impression before we scan them for better results. So as you can see, we have the base of the pouring material. We need to remove that before importing that on the software. Here's a trick that I always tend to tell my team is that before deciding if this case or this STL is a good STL to work with, please remove all the extra parts from the STL to make it look exactly like this before saying if this STL is a good STL to go. Why? Because as a dentist, my eyes tend to see the bad parts of the teeth or the bad edges of the STL. So I need to remove them first before deciding if this STL is a good to go. So maybe if you look at this STL, once you say that, no, I cannot work with this STL, there's too much extra material and the teeth are not captured good enough. However, when we prepare the STLs and remove all the extra parts, you see, the teeth are perfect and we can work with this one. We also, if we have spacing, for example, extracted tooth or an impacted tooth, if it's more than 3 millimeters, we can do one of two things, either replace a Pontic or an artificial tooth or a bar. In the anterior segments, from the canine to the canine, we prefer to add a Pontic or an artificial tooth for aesthetic reasons. So the doctor can fill that void or the space of the artificial tooth with tooth colored materials or composite materials to be aesthetically good for the patient. As you can see in this case, number 25 was missing due to an extraction, I think. And after the STL was prepared, we added an artificial tooth or a Pontic for aesthetic reasons. However, if the space is posteriorly, we need to add a bar. Why? To eliminate the undercuts. As you can see, there's an undercut over there in the gingival part. And when we added a bar, we elevated the gingiva just a little bit to eliminate the undercuts. When you eliminate the undercuts from the STL, the aligners will be removed freely and easily and will not be damaged. So here's a question. Which arch should we start with when planning? What do you think, the maxilla or the mandible? For me, I think this is a trick question. We have 55% saying the maxilla and we have 45% saying the mandible. Actually, I don't think there is a correct answer for this one, and I'll tell you why. For me, I would always go for the mandible, as this is what we call the diagnostic arch for any orthodontic case. However, some of my teammates would like to start with the easy arch, so they can start with the maxilla, or maybe they'd like to start with the most difficult arch, so that they can decide what they're going to do with this case. So you can either start with the maxilla or start with the mandible. If it were me, I would always go with the mandible. Okay, moving on to our planning software, the ortho planning software. Before we go to our software, show you the software part, here's a case that we actually did in our iSmile. You can see we have three pictures: the before treatment, the mid treatment, and the after treatment. This case was an anterior open bite case with generalized spacing due to macroglossia. What we did in this case, we retruded the anterior segments and extruded the anterior segments to close the open bite and to close the anterior spacings. This is the mid treatment. You see the spacings are less and the open bite is almost done. And in the after treatment or the final, it's good. And looking from the side view, from the left side, pre-treatment, you can see all the anterior teeth are flared or proclined with an anterior open bite. However, in the post-treatment bite, lateral left side, the teeth are retroclined. They are a little bit more straighter. The overjet and the overbite is good enough. And the canines and molars are in class 1. I'm going to show you this case afterwards. So here's another question. What do you think? Should we apply the IPR digitally on the software? Yes or no? We have 70% saying yes, and we have 30% saying no. The correct answer is no. We never add the IPR digitally on the software. Why? Because if your software, if you have the IPR tool on your software, you're going to find it very difficult to manipulate it or control it digitally. So you will not be able to have a perfect contact in this specific area between specific teeth. So all the new softwares right now, they do not have the tool to provide IPR. They only tell you you need to do this specific IPR, for example, 0.2, 0.4. It doesn't matter, but you need to have this specific IPR in this specific region, and the doctor will do that clinically in the patient's mouth. All right, so moving on to the software. I'm going to open up the case for the anterior open bite. Just a moment. Okay, so this is the case that I showed you in the presentation with an anterior open bite. As you can see, it's an anterior open bite case with generalized spacing. I'm going to show you an animation of how the treatment went from the frontal view and the right or left view. From the front view, we added the engagers or the attachments. We have different shapes and different sizes of engagers. We retruded the anteriors while extruding them to close the anterior open bite. It took about 20 aligners for the upper arch and 17 aligners for the lower arch. And from the right view, you can see the proclined or flared anteriors. They are straightened now with better aesthetics. Okay, so I'm going to move now to another case that we're going to do together on the software. Just a moment. Okay, so in this case, this is our planning software. This is what we call the Maestro 3D Dental Studio. Why are we using this specific software? For me, actually, it's user-friendly. It has less tools to get the job done, and it's very accurate. So talking about this software, we have two main parts. We have what we call the segmentation and the teeth movement, or what we call the virtual setup. Okay, so regarding the segmentation part, we need to tell the software which parts are the teeth and which parts are the gingiva. Why? Because I cannot move any tooth while the software doesn't know if this is a tooth or not. So in the segmentation part, I need to slice the STL into different teeth and different gingival parts, so I can move each tooth individually. So we're going to segment the upper arch together. You can have it done in two ways. Either you need to segment the whole arch if needed, or you can segment only the teeth needed for movements. So for example, I'm going to only move the 6 anteriors, or from the canine to the canine. So that's what I'm going to segment in this case. How you're going to do so on this software, this is very easy, and I'm going to show you how it's user-friendly. All you need to do is click on the mesial and distal parts of the tooth. Double-click on the distal part and double-click on the mesial part. You see, the software will automatically tell you that this is number 1. This is the tooth. So as you can see, this is an incorrect numbering. So we need to adjust the number of the teeth. So this is number 6. We need to choose number 6. As you can see, on the left side of the screen, the software automatically changes from number 1 to number 6. So I can move forward. And it tells you how many millimeters actually is the tooth. It also measures the Bolton's analysis if you're going to segment the whole arches. Then we need to move forward to number 7. You see, automatically the software moves forward. So I don't need to keep adjusting it back and forth. All I need to do is adjust the first one, and then I'm good to go. We're going to number 8, number 9, number 10, and number 7, and number 11, I'm sorry. Okay, after I'm done, I can press next. The software will ask me, would you like to proceed with the tooth segmentation? I'll press yes. Then the software will do some calculations. And then the software will automatically detect the gingival margins or draw me an outline of the tooth. So all I need to do is make sure that the outline is correct. You don't need to be very accurate. You don't need to be very meticulous while doing the segmentation or deciding the outline, because the software does a pretty good job at fixing that. So how I'm going to fix the outline, you see there are dots or nodes in orange color. You need to press on it. It's going to be highlighted in blue and drag it and place it in the correct area. If there's a specific area that I cannot see, I cannot determine whether this is the margin or not, the gingival margin or not, I can change the color of the STL so I can see it perfectly. You see, this is the margin. Okay, so I can move forward. I'm going to do that very quickly from you. Okay. After I'm done with this tooth, I need to press next. The software will detect the next tooth and draw me an outline for the gingival margin. If you have any questions you need to ask, feel free to do so in the Q&A box.
Dr. Ahmad, we have a few questions here. Let me start with, do you plan the case using the patient photo or the doctor recommendation, or according to the patient's desire?
I would treat the case with both requirements, but to me the main goal is the doctor's requirements, because of course the doctor knows exactly what he needs to do with the case. So he needs to be very specific in his requirements and his notes in order to process the case. I always tend to look at the pictures to see whether I'm going to need to, for example, if we have an anterior open bite, I need to know which arch I'm going to extrude more. If I have a gummy smile, for example, which arch I'm going to intrude more. So I always tend to look at the pictures to try to reach a good verdict or a good decision what to do exactly with this case.
Another question we have here, could you perform some digital editing for poor impressions to correct them? And what is the best solution with poor impressions?
Actually, we can fix the errors of the impressions, as we said before, using our CAD software or what we call the mesh mixer. If we have a wrong margin or a broken tooth or a hole in the tooth, I can fill that up in our mesh mixer. So it's very important to prepare the case using the mesh mixer or any CAD software you would like to use. For us in iSmile, we always tend to use the mesh mixer because it's actually easy to use and it's free.
Does aligners have any role solving different skeletal classes?
To be honest, there are no evidence to actually say that we can correct these skeletal defects using aligners. However, we can incorporate the movements or the treatment with other modalities. For example, we can use mini screws, or we can use what we call TADs to have elastics to track or to do some traction in specific teeth, a specific quadrant to try to correct skeletal defects. However, but there are no evidence that we can do so.
And we have one more question here. The question says, although we agree that all required material should be submitted, but what would you do if you have missing data such as chief complaint?
It depends on what is missing from the requirements. If the chief complaint is missing and we have adequate doctor's notes to proceed with the case, we can do so. However, if we don't have any notes or a productive note, like we said before, specific instructions to proceed with the case, or if we don't have pictures for the case, or if we don't have the STLs, we cannot proceed with the case. So we need to put this case on hold until we receive the requirements needed. Okay, as you noticed in this case, I changed the colors many times while I'm working. Why? This is a trick I learned using this software, that my eyes get tired using a specific color or a specific shade of the teeth. So I tend to change the colors while segmenting the teeth, so I don't get tired planning the case or segmenting the case. So I tend to do 2 teeth or 3 teeth using this color and the other ones in this color. After I'm done, I'm going to press next. The software will always ask me, do you want to save before continuing? I always press yes. Why? Because if I press no, I click no, if anything happens to the software, it crashes, I'm going to lose everything that I did. So whenever the software asks me to save, and it's going to ask me to save after each step, I need to press yes. So don't forget, always press yes when the software asks. After I'm done, the software will tell me or ask me if this is the cutting line or the spline lines that I need to separate the teeth from the STL. In this area, I don't need to do anything. Actually, all I need to do is take a look at it, make sure the outlines are correct, and then I need to press next. The software will do its calculations. Then it's going to move forward. Again, software will ask me if you want to save before continuing. As I said, always press next. Always press yes. The software will take a little bit of time to load, and then the next phase is what we call the origins or the virtual roots. If you have a CVCT or a cone beam with the natural roots of the patients, and they are in DICOM files, you need to convert them into STL file, import them on the software with the STLs that we have, and the software will automatically detect the actual roots of the teeth so that the movements are 100% accurate. However, we don't need the CVCT or any X-ray in our requirements or to proceed with any aligner space. So in this phase, all I need to do is just tell the software that this is the virtual root for this specific tooth. How I do so, I just place the root on the long axis of the tooth. You see, we have 2 arrows, the blue arrow and the red arrow. The blue arrow, it indicates the buccolingual movements of this specific tooth. So the number 6, it's going to move buccolingually in this direction, in the blue direction. However, if I change the arrow, if I moved it to this direction, then when I tell the software that I need to move number 6 buccally, it will move in this direction. If I tell the software that I need to move it lingually or palatally, it will move in this direction. So it's not correct. I need to place it fairly to where I think this is the correct buccolingual direction. The red arrow, it indicates the extrusion-intrusion direction. So if I'm going to extrude, number 6 is going to move in this direction. If I'm going to intrude it, it's going to move in the same direction. If I misplace the arrow, so the extrusion value or the direction will not be correct. So I need to place it vertically with the long axis. I'm going to do that very quickly. And this is very, very important to tell the software the long axis of the teeth or the directions of movement, because it will be very difficult for you to plan a case when the directions are wrong. For example, if I need to move number 9 in the palatal direction, while I have the blue arrow like that, it will move palatally and distally. So I need to incorporate some mesial movements or mesial values to eliminate the distal movements. So try to do that a little bit accurately to have better results. The segmentation, it seems to be a little bit tiring. You may think that it's not important enough. However, this is the most important part of planning a case, because you tell the software that this is a tooth, this is the direction of the movement, all the needed info or instructions before you actually move on to the virtual setup. After I'm done, I'm going to press next. The software asks me if I'd like to save. Again, I'm going to press yes. Now the software will do its calculations and is going to tell me, now you did a good job. These are the teeth in the white color, and these are the teeth, these are the gingiva in the pink color.
We have another question here. Do you need any kind of X-ray to do your planning? And if yes, which is most preferable?
We don't need any X-ray to process a case, but it's very beneficial to have one if we have an impacted tooth or an extracted tooth or a missing tooth. It can be Pan-Rex, it can be a CBCT, anything just to see the bone, if they have a pathological region or a pathology in the bone. If we have an impacted tooth, we need to see the impacted tooth in the X-ray, the Pan-Rex or the CBCT, so that I cannot or I will not move the adjacent teeth. So it's not mandatory to provide us with X-rays in order to proceed with the case. However, if we have a missing tooth, it's advisable to do so. Okay, so moving on to the fun part, which is the virtual setup, actually moving the teeth. All I need to do is press on the virtual setup. The software will get prepared to move the teeth. Okay, so as we see in front of us, we have two sections. The right section, which is the models that we have, and the left section, which has a lot of options, a lot of tools to use. I'm going to explain each one individually. First thing, we have the virtual setup. It says layers the upper jaw, layers the lower jaw. What does layers mean in this software? In order to process a case using the Maestro 3D, we cannot incorporate different movements in different directions on the first go. We need to separate the movements. For example, if I need to move a specific tooth buccally while rotating it and extrusion, I cannot do that on the same go. So I need to separate the movements. So I'm going to do the first layer, expansion, and then the second layer, it can be rotations, and then the third layer, it can be extrusions or intrusions or correcting the torque. So I need to do each tooth movement individually to have accurate results. So before we do anything with the case, our in-house orthodontists, they always tend to try to get almost a good treatment plan before they actually move any tooth. Okay, so I'm going to try to move the upper arch in this webinar, try to correct the crowding. As you can see, we have number 6 a little bit rotated, number 11 a little bit rotated, number 10 a little bit mesial out, number 9 is not in the correct alignment. So I'm going to correct that. How I'm going to do that, all I need to do is one of two things. I can click on a tooth, for example, number 11, and while pressing the shift key and left clicking the mouse, I'm going to drag the tooth into any direction, either buccolingually or mesodistally, any direction I would like to have. It's like panning movements. However, if I change my view to, for example, a frontal view, while pressing the shift and the left click also, I'm going to move the tooth up and down, extrusion or intrusion. So it depends on the view you're looking at. So if I want to move this tooth buccally, I need to look at it from the occlusal view, press shift, and move it buccally. As you can see, it moved buccally. Okay, I'm going to do that again with number 11 and move it buccally. Number 9, I'm going to move it a little bit buccally. Okay, I want to rotate these teeth also. I can do that in another way. But first, I need to add a new layer. All I need to do is press add layer. It's going to add layer 2. It's where I stopped. It's from the where I stopped. So I'm going to click on this tooth with the control button on your keyboard, left click, going to rotate the tooth around its long axis. That's from the occlusal view. However, if I change the view from the distal or the mesial view, I'm going to do some torquing, as you can see, using the control and left click. And if I change the view once more from the facial view, control and left click, it's going to do some tipping movement. So it depends on the view you're looking at. We can move the teeth using another way. You see the movement overview on the left side of the screen. We have a lot of options: the tip, rotation, torque, buccolingual, extrusion, intrusion, mesial, and distal. I can move the teeth while pressing the shift and the control button, as I said before, or if I want to rotate number 11, for example, rotation, I can hover my mouse on the rotation values and use the scroll wheel. As you can see, move up is going to rotate mesial in, move down is going to rotate mesial out. For me, I would use both ways. How? I'm going to do all the major movements using the control and shift button. However, if I want to tweak a specific tooth, I'm going to do that using the movement overview panel. So in this tooth, I'm going to move it. Control. As you can see, it needs a little bit of extrusion. No worries, we can do that in another layer. Move it lingually a little bit. Number 9, I'm going to rotate it. Okay. After I'm done with the rotations needed, I can add another layer for the extrusions. For example, I want to level the arches and level the teeth. As you can see, the software, it generated layer number 3. I can press on this tooth. Number 10, move on to the movement overview. I can extrude it. Notice that when I extruded the tooth, it opened some spaces, mesial and distal. So the software, it moves the teeth while having the ortho concepts or the orthodontic guidelines. You see, if I need to open up a space, mesial or distal of any tooth, I have different ways, either expansion or slightly proclination or torquing the teeth, or extrusion intrusions, or some rotations can fix that as well. So when I extruded number 10, it opened up some space. So I can do that. I can close the spaces in the same phase as I'm not moving this specific tooth to close this while extruding. Okay. I'm going to show you next, if I needed to do some IPR, how I'm going to do that on the software, because we had a question saying if I'm going to have the IPR done virtually on the software or not. And the correct answer was no, we never do that. Okay. So all I need to do, if I need to do some IPR between, for example, number 8 and number 9, I can see that I left some spaces distal to number 9. Don't mind that. I'm going to close that later on. I need to move to the intersection part of the left panel, choose the mesial and distal, change my values to 0.1, which is the least thing that I can see, the software can see, and toggle the show button. The software will automatically detect the intersection mesial and distal of each tooth. So you see the software didn't capture any intersection between the adjacent teeth between 7 and 8, 8 and 9. It didn't capture any intersections. However, it did capture an intersection between 6 and 7. So all I need to do is hover my mouse on the red color or the red line. It will indicate how much IPR needed in this area. I'm not going to do any IPR manually on the software. I'm going to tell the doctor that we need to do IPR 0.1 in this section. For me, 0.1 is too small or too little for an IPR. I need to have it more than that. So all I need to do is move number 6 a little bit more so the intersections can be good enough for any IPR. So you see it's 0.19. For me, that's good. It's going to be rounded up to 0.2. That's okay for me. So how I'm going to tell the doctor to do 0.2. The doctor will not see the software. I'm going to tell the software to generate a PDF with the IPR needed and where exactly. All I need to do is press on the IPR button, choose the sheet. The software will automatically detect the IPR needed. You see, I changed my values that I'm not going to see anything less than 0.1. So the 0.05, 0.09, I'm not going to see that. I'm only going to do IPR here between 6 and 7, which is going to be 0.2. So I'm going to click here, change the value to 0.2. And then the doctor will have notice in his PDF saying that we need to do 0.2 of IPR in this region. Okay, and then I'm going to finish up the movement, the alignment of the teeth, just to go on to the next part. I know that I did a lot of layering, but I'm not going to do that at the moment. Moving on to the next part, we are going to do the attachments or place the attachments or the engagers. In the Maestro 3D software, we have a lot of engagers of attachment libraries. As you can see, we have a lot of attachments that we can use. You can see attachment 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. We have different shapes, triangle, sphere with different bevels. We have the half-cutted capsules. We have different shapes, for example, a house. how I'm going to know which attachment to use. All I need to do is just press on any attachment I would like to have. For example, number 5. I'm going to look at this. This is the shape of the attachment. For example, if I choose number 8, this is the shape of the attachment. If I need to look at ellipsoid, this is the shape of the attachment. So for us in the iSmile, we tend to use some small attachments with bevels, but we tend to play around with the bevels in certain areas to exert forces to move the tooth in specific direction. So for example, if I want to extrude number 10, I can place any type of attachment, but for us, it depends on the extrusion values. For example, I'm going to use the sphere 100 degrees of slope, 100 degrees of bevel. As you see, we did only 0.9 millimeter extrusion, so that's less than 1 millimeter. So I don't need to have a 90-degree bevel to exert forces for the extrusion. So I chose the sphere with 100 degree of slope or bevel. I'm going to press on the plus sign. It's going to give me a cursor. I'm going to go for number 10, double click, and it's going to add the attachment. All I need to do is adjust the shape, the size of the tooth, rotate it if needed to any direction I would like to have. For example, I'm going to have it do some extrusion, so I'm going to move it a little bit gingerly. I need to adjust the thickness of the attachment. We go with 0.7 or 0.8 millimeter of the thickness, because we don't want the attachment to be super thick, so that the attachment will break while the patient is removing the aligner, and we don't want it to be too thin or flat, because it will not do any kind of movements. So this is how we add the attachments on the teeth. If I want to do some rotations, we can use either the 110 degrees of slope or 145 degrees of slope. It depends on how much of rotation I'm actually doing in this case. If it's more than 10 degrees, I'm going to add the 110 degrees. If it's less than 10 degrees, I'm going to add the 110 degrees of bevel of slope. If it's more than 10 degrees of rotations, I'm going to add the 145 degrees of slope. So all I need to do is, using the 110 degrees, I'm going to add the attachment to where I want the rotations to be done. If I want to know which direction I want the attachment to be facing, I can choose this tooth. You see, it's moving mesial up. So I'm going to rotate my attachment, place it a little bit mesially, so that the slope will be facing the mesial direction. I'm going to adjust my thickness, the attachment to be 0.7 or 0.8, and that I'll be done. Okay. So I'm going to press next. If I want to save, it's going to ask me save. I say yes. Okay. So this is it for today's webinar. I hope you enjoyed the session. It was beneficial enough for you for today. So thank you very much for having me in the webinar, and I'll be talking to you soon.
Thanks everyone for joining us.